Hello, my dear emperors. I'm Marco, and tonight we're drifting into the story of Adolf Hitler. I guess. Why I guess? Because this isn't your usual history lecture. Here, we don't just talk about the rise and fall of the world's most infamous dictator. We speak as if you were him. Yes, that brooding child staring out the window in a quiet Austrian town, wondering why your father's affection always arrived knotted in his fists. From Braunau to Berlin, from watercolors to war crimes, this story doesn't start with ideology. It begins with bruises and silence. So if you're up for it, let the world fade, dim the lights, and join me. You are born in Braunau am Inn in 1889, a name that feels both unimportant and strangely prophetic, like the universe gave you a forgettable birthplace, so you'd overcompensate. Your father, Alois, doesn't believe in dreams unless they involve regulations, obedience, and hitting small people until they comply. He's a minor customs official with a major temper, and unfortunately for you, he's around frequently. He believes in discipline the way some men believe in God, fervently and with a belt. Your mother, Clara, is the balm to this chaos, soft-spoken, doting, the one warm hand in a world that feels perpetually clenched. You're not a popular child, not disliked, necessarily, just misplaced. Other boys chase balls, you chase shadows. Teachers complain that you're distracted, but really, you're observing, always observing. You like drawing. Well, you think it's art. Others think it's marginally better than the doodles near the back of a math book. But that doesn't stop you. In your head, you're already someone. There's no need to wait for permission. Historians still argue whether your early antisocial tendencies were the result of your father's beatings or your own wiring, but it doesn't matter to you. What matters is that you learn to keep things inside. It's safer that way, like that time Alois yells at you for hours over a school report, and you just nod and pretend it doesn't sting. That nod becomes your armor. At school, your grades fluctuate like Austrian politics. One term you're promising, the next your report card reads like a warning label. The only thing consistent is your sense of superiority. You might be failing, but you're failing with vision. Others memorize, you already know. You devour books, not just school books, mind you, but romantic nationalism, pseudo-history, mythology, a weird stew of Germanic pride, historical grievance, and operatic drama. It fills your inner void better than any real person ever has. Alois dies in 19. You're 13. Part of you is relieved. The other part realizes he'll never get to see you make it. That grief sticks to your bones, though you'd never admit it. When Clara dies just 4 years later, you're 18 and completely unmoored. Her last breath takes your last anchor with it. A Jewish doctor treats her kindly and thoroughly, a fact that future you will conveniently omit when constructing your ideology. You start wearing your pain like a uniform. You drift from Linz to Vienna with the hazy dream of becoming an artist. But already your mind is separating the world into types, strong and weak, cultured and inferior, admired and ignored. You decide which people deserve to exist in the world, based largely on who claps for you. In your child's room, long before any speeches or uniforms or bunkers, you stare at a map of the German Empire, not Austria-Hungary, mind you, and feel a flicker of something like belonging, not to a family, not even to a town, but to an idea, something big, something pure, something where no one gets to tell you no. But that's all in the future. For now, you're a teenage boy, pacing a small Austrian room, furiously sketching buildings that no one will pay to hang, wondering why the world won't recognize your genius. You tell yourself you're destined for greatness. After all, wasn't Napoleon born in obscurity too? Still, no one's listening. Yet, Vienna, the grand imperial city of coffee houses, Mozart echoes, and rejection letters. You arrive with a suitcase, a stack of crumpled sketches, and the naive certainty that you're about to be discovered. You can practically hear the applause already. Imagine the professors at the Academy of Fine Arts weeping with admiration over your watercolors. And then reality, the letter that says no, the one that gently suggests your architectural inclinations might be more promising than your actual painting. You don't burn the letter, you don't cry, you just stare at it until your hands forget how to unclench. Historians still argue whether your artistic failure was a pivotal turning point or just another brick in the wall of frustration you were already building. But what's undeniable is this: Vienna doesn't want you. Not once, but twice. 2 failed applications to the academy, and suddenly your dreams of being a respected artist are as tattered as the coat you now wear through snow-choked alleyways. Your savings dwindle, the allowance your mother left fades. You end up in flop houses, shelters, sleeping on benches near the Ringstrasse. You sell a few postcards, cheap paintings of buildings, to tourists too polite to haggle. You become intimately familiar with the Vienna gutter, and not metaphorically. It's cold, it smells of coal and crushed cigarettes. Your fingers crack in the winter wind, and each meal is a negotiation. And this is where things get complicated. You're not alone in your misfortune. Vienna is crowded with displaced people, Jews, Slavs, workers, intellectuals, and while many adapt, you retreat. You spend your days at libraries, absorbing volumes of Teutonic myths, pan-Germanism, and articles dripping with ethnic superiority. You begin to see patterns, dangerous ones. You start believing you're not poor because you failed, but because someone else succeeded, someone who shouldn't have, and those someone else's have names you start repeating in your head like a chant. Here's the irony. Many of the people who help you survive in Vienna are Jewish. The doctor who treated your mother, Jewish. The art dealer who occasionally buys your work, Jewish. But logic has no place in ideology. You don't hate them individually. You hate them collectively. It's cleaner that way. You build an enemy that never asks questions and always loses in your mental debates. You become a ghost, drifting through the cafes, half-starved, oddly dignified, always watching. You speak little, write more. Scribbles about destiny, about purity, about betrayal. Your journal becomes your mirror, and what it reflects isn't hope, it's control, not over your life, but over a narrative, over a version of the world where your failure isn't your fault. Vienna itself is a contradiction, beautiful and brutal, imperial and rotting. It feeds your bitterness. The Habsburg monarchy is teetering, a patchwork empire stitched together with old money and older grudges. You see Parliament descend into shouting matches between Czechs, Magyars, Germans, Slavs, all of them arguing in languages you pretend are inferior. To you, this isn't multiculturalism, it's decay, disorder, proof that only strong, singular rule can hold a people together. You begin to romanticize strength, not empathy, not compromise, just power. Like an iron sculpture, cold and immovable, you idealize German identity, not the warm beer and bratwurst kind, but the mythic blood and soil kind, the kind where borders dissolve and Greater Germany marches eternal. By 1913, your luck runs dry, or maybe it ferments. You leave Vienna for Munich, dodging Austrian conscription. You say it's because you hate the Habsburgs, which is true, but also you're running. From failure, from poverty, from obscurity. Munich is cleaner, sharper, less sprawling. It feels more German, whatever that means to you now. Historians debate whether your Vienna years radicalized you or merely exposed what was already fermenting, but something curdled there in those long nights and longer winters. You didn't just lose your dream in Vienna, you lost any faith in the world playing fair, and once you lose that, well, everything becomes justifiable. Your art portfolio sits forgotten under a pile of unpaid rent notices. The streets that once promised culture now whisper conspiracy, and you, once a boy sketching domes and facades, now sketch empires instead, ones built not with color but control. Vienna rejected you, but you won't forget or forgive. And then comes the war. Sweet Blessed war. Not the terrifying, muddy bloodbath that it is for most men, but for you, a revelation. Finally, something makes sense. You're not a starving artist anymore. You're a soldier in the German army, uniformed, armed, part of a story larger than yourself. You sign up in Munich in 1914, conveniently overlooking the part where you're technically still an Austrian citizen. Paperwork blurs in chaos. You don't complain. The army doesn't care about your failed art career or your philosophical rants. It cares that you show up and march when told. And you do. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't fraternize. You're a loner, but reliable, the kind of man who takes orders seriously. Too seriously, perhaps? Historians still argue whether you saw much frontline action, but one thing's certain: you serve. You run messages between trenches, dodging shrapnel and mud-soaked death. You're wounded, temporarily blinded by a gas attack. But even before that, something about war clicks in you. The camaraderie, the uniforms, the obedience. It's the opposite of Vienna. There's no ambiguity in the trenches, just the enemy, the mud and the mission. The truth, you love it. You, who were once adrift in libraries and alleyways, now belong. For the first time, the world is organized. No more questions about your place in it. You're German. You're a fighter. You wear the Iron Cross like a talisman, especially the First Class, awarded on the recommendation of a Jewish officer, though you'll never mention that again. You aren't popular with the other soldiers. You don't join in jokes. You don't write home. You don't even bond over fear. You sketch sometimes, stare a lot, brood even more. You're that strange fellow who reads pamphlets by lamplight and mutters about national destiny while shells fall nearby. But you're there, always there, present, silent, absorbing. The war becomes your crucible. You're forged in its fire. Its trauma doesn't break you, it defines you. While others dream of peace, you dream of resolve. The front doesn't feel like hell to you, it feels like purpose. And then, just as suddenly, it ends. November 1918. Armistice, celebration in Paris, mourning in Berlin. But not you. You're in a field hospital, your eyes recovering from gas exposure. You wake to a broken country. Your comrades vanished. Your mission collapsed. You ask yourself, how did we lose? The answer isn't in your wound. It isn't even on the battlefield. It's back home, you think. Cowards, Marxists, Jews, pacifists, the so-called November criminals, politicians you never trusted, holding pens instead of rifles. In your mind, they stabbed you in the back. The stab in the back myth is already circulating in certain corners of the right-wing press. You adopt it like gospel. It explains everything. Your disillusionment, your humiliation, your confusion. You didn't lose, they did. You were betrayed. Back in Munich, the streets are chaos. Revolution, strikes, leftist uprisings. Soldiers return to unemployment. Officers to irrelevance. The monarchy is gone. The republic weak. You find comfort in the one place that still makes sense. The army. You stay on as a sort of political informant. You attend meetings, take notes, watch the fringes of ideology bloom like mold on stale bread. Then one day you're sent to observe a small gathering, the German Workers' Party. They meet in beer halls, grumble about the same things you do. Versailles, Jews, Bolsheviks. You're supposed to report on them. Instead you find a home. More than that, you find a stage. You stand up and speak, and the room goes still. There's power in your voice. Rage, certainty, rhythm. You don't just talk, you summon. It's like performing war without bullets. You're not quoting books now, you're writing doctrine. People listen. And for a man like you, that's all the fuel you need. Germany, 1919. You're back in civilian clothes, but nothing about you feels civilian. The war may be over, but inside you, it's just paused. A slow, boiling rage simmers beneath your carefully ironed jacket. The Treaty of Versailles is announced, and it's not a treaty, it's a humiliation gift-wrapped in bureaucracy. Germany is blamed for everything. Your army is neutered, your economy strangled, and your pride publicly flogged. You read Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, again and again, like it personally spit in your face. Reparations, territory lost, military restrictions. You don't just feel betrayed, you feel castrated. And you're not alone. The cafes are full of grumbling veterans, laid-off workers, and students too young to remember how the world used to make sense. Revolution is in the air, but so is nostalgia. Everyone wants Germany great again, though no one agrees on what that means. Into this national identity crisis steps you, still technically a nobody, still technically shouting into the void, but the void is beginning to echo back. Historians still argue whether your rhetoric caught fire because of your delivery or because Germany was already soaked in gasoline. You believe it's both. You're a prophet with a PowerPoint of national grievances. Each speech is a sermon. You don't just say Germany was wronged. You say Germany was betrayed. You don't just say we need strength. You say we need cleansing. You change the German Workers' Party into something bigger. The National Socialist German Workers' Party. You tack socialist on there, not because you are one, you're about as socialist as a tax auditor, but because it makes the name sound populist, accessible, revolutionary. You don't want to seem elitist, not yet. You speak in packed beer halls. The ceilings drip with condensation. The air is thick with sweat, smoke, and unresolved trauma. You hammer your points with passion. Every sentence a blow. You rail against Jews, against Marxists, against Versailles, against weak leaders, against modern art, against everything that doesn't fit into your vision of order. You offer not facts, but feelings, not plans, but purpose. And your listeners, they're tired, not just physically, but existentially. Tired of uncertainty, tired of shame, and your certainty personified. You promise to restore not just Germany's borders, but its identity, its masculinity, its myth. You rise quickly through sheer charisma and theatricality. You understand something the other politicians don't, the power of drama, of lighting, of silence, of a well-timed fist on a podium. You turn politics into theatre and the German people into your audience. You surround yourself with men who, like you, are searching for meaning in ruins. Rudolf Hess, Hermann Goering, Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, broken veterans and broken romantics who see in you not just a leader but a mirror, their pain made eloquent. And then in 1923 you make your first real move. Inspired by Mussolini's March on Rome, you plan your own coup in Munich. It's bold, it's dumb, it fails. You and your followers are arrested, some killed. The beer hall putsch ends with you in handcuffs and a black eye. But the arrest, that's not the end. It's the beginning of your legend. You stand trial and use it as a stage. You speak not as a criminal, but as a martyr, a visionary, the man who tried to save Germany from itself. The courtroom nods along. Even the judges seem reluctant to convict you. You get 5 years and serve less than 1. You emerge not shamed, but canonized. And while in prison, you write Mein Kampf, part autobiography, part unhinged prophecy, part revenge fantasy. You pour in all your rage, all your warped theories, all your ambitions. It's not well written, but it's compelling in the way a fever dream is compelling. You call it My Struggle because my attempted overthrow of the government, didn't quite have the same punch. When you walk free in 1924, you're not just Hitler anymore. You're Hitler, a name that now echoes with dread and possibility. You step out of prison into a Germany that doesn't quite know what to do with itself. The chaos has quieted, but the wounds are still bleeding under the surface. The Weimar Republic limps along, trying to look like a functioning democracy, while juggling inflation, street fights, and a whole lot of angry mustaches. You, now infamous, bide your time. Public speaking is banned for you, but not forever. And anyway, you've learned something in prison. Power isn't taken in a brawl. It's taken with patience, paperwork, and just the right amount of menace. Your followers haven't disappeared. If anything, your arrest has elevated you. You're not a failed coup plotter, you're a political martyr. The newspapers that mocked you now quote you. The people who laughed at your early speeches now wait in line to hear you again. You become a symbol for those who think democracy is weak and that Germany needs a firm hand. It's an image you polish with care. And when the ban on your speeches lifts, you return to the podium like a prophet stepping down from the mountain. You don't shout right away. You let the room hang on your silence. Then you begin slowly, deliberately, and once more they follow. In 1929, the stock market crashes in New York and echoes like a gunshot through Europe. Unemployment in Germany soars. Banks collapse. Bread lines stretch around corners. Hope becomes a luxury good. And you become inevitable. Historians still argue whether your rise was the result of the crash or whether you would have found another ladder. But this moment, this economic collapse, gives you everything, because desperate people don't want nuance. They want certainty. They want someone to blame. And you've got a list. You promise jobs. You promise order. You promise a return to greatness. So grand, even people who've never been to a battlefield feel nostalgic for your imaginary past. Your rallies swell. Your SA stormtroopers march in the streets like a shadow army. Your message spreads. You're not just a politician, you're a savior. In 1932, you run for president. You lose to Paul von Hindenburg, the walking relic of a different war, a man held together mostly by medals and resentment. But you get 37% of the vote. You are now too large to ignore. So they don't. In 1933, in one of history's most awkward compromises, Hindenburg names you chancellor. It's meant to appease your movement while keeping you in check, like handing a match to someone standing in a dynamite factory and saying, "Just don't light anything." Spoiler, you light everything. You waste no time. The Reichstag burns. Coincidence? You think not. Communists are blamed. Civil liberties are suspended. Political opponents are arrested or vanish. You call it protection. The rest of the world calls it the beginning of the end. Then comes the enabling act. You don't need parliament anymore. You are law. You dissolve opposition parties. You make labor unions illegal. You coordinate everything under Nazi control. It's not a takeover. It's a rebranding. Germany isn't just Germany anymore. It's your Germany. You sell the illusion of salvation with the precision of a carnival barker. Autobahns, jobs, national pride. The people eat it up. They cheer at your rallies, draped in red and black, lost in a sea of symbols you designed for maximal psychological effect. Swastikas turn from ancient symbols to hypnotic eye traps, placed just right in the red, black and white, to say, you belong to this now. And the Jews, the communists, the intellectuals, you don't need to declare war on them. You just let the machine turn its gears. Laws pass, rights are stripped, books are burned, neighbors start whispering about who belongs and who doesn't. Violence simmers in the streets, not as chaos, but as policy. You're not restoring Germany. You're redefining it, removing anyone who doesn't fit into your vision, and you call it purification, destiny, order. You think you're saving a broken nation, but really you're just feeding it poison in golden cups. The war you so desperately wanted finally arrives, not in a blaze of flags, but with the mechanical shriek of dive bombers over Poland. September 1st, 1939. You've played the game of brinkmanship long enough. Now it's blitzkrieg time. Lightning war. Precision, shock, awe. Poland is sliced apart in weeks, and for a moment you look like a genius. A general without a battlefield stain. A conqueror with a pen instead of a saber. Britain and France declare war, but do very little at first. It's what historians later call the phony war. You don't mind. It gives you time to pose on maps and pretend you're a military mastermind. Your armies sweep through Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, France, Paris Falls, and you walk the Eiffel Tower like you own it, which now, technically, you sort of do. Historians still argue whether your early victories were brilliant strategy or just opponents caught off guard. You, of course, take full credit. You pose in trench coats. You dictate from mountaintop retreats. You bathe in the euphoria of the Volk, who cheer and chant and throw roses, like you just scored the winning goal in the World Cup of Nationalism. But beneath the polished boots and propaganda films, the machinery is grinding. Your military command is growing nervous. You micromanage. You scream. You ignore generals. You trust only loyalty, not expertise. Your decisions get weird. You delay invasions. You overestimate. You underestimate. But no one tells you the truth anymore, not if they want to keep their kneecaps. And then June 22, 1941, you make your biggest move, Operation Barbarossa. You invade the Soviet Union. Because why not? You've conquered half of Europe. You think the Russian bear will roll over. Instead, it mauls. At first you win big. Cities fall. Millions of Red Army troops are captured. But then the weather turns. Your troops freeze in thin uniforms. Tanks stall in snow. Supply lines collapse. Moscow resists. The Soviet counterattack is brutal. Your dream of conquering the East starts to look a lot like a bad dream you can't wake up from. And yet, you double down. You won't retreat, not an inch, because retreat is weakness. You send men to die holding invisible lines on maps. You order cities to be taken for their symbolic value, not their strategic importance. You begin to live more in delusion than in fact. Your enemies multiply. Britain isn't defeated. The US joins the war after Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, it's you against the world, and yet you keep acting like you've already won. Berlin is still beautiful on the surface. The people still cheer. The trains still run. But those trains are taking people to camps now. People disappearing. Families erased. Your vision isn't just political anymore. It's genocidal. And while you play emperor in the Reich Chancery, the walls close in. Allied bombers turn cities to rubble. Your military loses ground in Africa, in Italy, in the East. And you stop appearing in public. You retreat to your bunker, like a dragon hoarding delusions instead of gold. Inside that bunker, maps become your reality. You shuffle imaginary armies across territories that no longer hold. You scream at generals. You fire people for failing to win impossible battles. You draft non-existent divisions. You plan counterattacks with units that are already ash. The man who once stood in front of thousands now speaks only to shadows. Your speeches are shorter. Your health declines. Your decisions wobble between incoherence and fanaticism. You become the cautionary tale of every leader who believes his own myth too much. The war you unleashed now devours everything. Cities, lives, your closest allies. They begin to doubt you. Some plot against you. The July 20 assassination attempt fails, but the message is clear. Not even your inner circle thinks you can win. And yet you stay in the bunker. You stay, even as Berlin falls around you. Even as Soviet artillery rattles the foundations above. Even as your empire crumbles into memory. You stay because out there is defeat, and in here is whatever's left. You called it destiny, but all it ever really was destruction. The end, when it comes, is not triumphant. It is not cinematic. There are no last speeches from balconies, no final parades, no poetic send-offs, just you, pale and twitching, buried deep under the chancellery, scribbling on paper that no longer matters, surrounded by cement, stale air, and sycophants too afraid to speak the truth. It's April 1945. Berlin is a skeleton city. The Red Army surrounds it like a vice. The sounds of artillery are no longer distant. They're intimate, close like footsteps in the hall. Every morning another street is gone, another command post is silent, and you still shuffle maps, still bark commands to divisions that exist only in your memory. Reality has stopped accepting your orders. But let's back up a moment. It's not just military collapse you're facing. It's personal. The inner circle that once looked at you with awe now looks at you like a ticking bomb. Goering, your beloved Luftwaffe ace, tries to take control behind your back. Himmler, your high priest of terror, opens secret peace negotiations. Traitors, you call them, but really, they just see the writing on the bunker wall. You lash out with dismissals, threats, fantasies of counterattack, but there are no armies left to move, no fuel to burn, just illusions that flicker dimly like your increasingly erratic mind. And then there's Eva Braun, your longtime companion, mostly a footnote in your life story until now. She chooses to stay with you, not because of ideology or loyalty to the Reich, but perhaps out of fatal devotion, or an unwillingness to imagine a world after you. You marry her in the bunker, in a ceremony that feels more like a funeral than a wedding. The champagne is flat, the guests are exhausted, even the signatures tremble. Historians still argue whether your decision to stay in Berlin was out of loyalty, cowardice, or theatrical obsession. You told your generals you wouldn't leave the capital, that you'd rather shoot yourself than fall into enemy hands. For once, you stick to your word. On April 30, 1945, you and Eva retreat to your room. You bite down on the capsule. You pull the trigger. She follows suit. Just like that, the man who once commanded empires dies not in glory, but in silence. In a room so small it barely fits your coffinless bodies. Your staff finds you slumped, blood on the carpet. They wrap you quickly, carry you up the stairs. Outside the garden is a war zone. They douse you in petrol, light the match. The flames rise, though the rain does its best to object. You don't burn easily. The world, it seems, resists your exit too. There are no mourners, no elegies, just the crackle of fire and the crumbling of your dream. As your ashes mix with mud, your empire disintegrates above. In the days that follow, your image becomes a ghost. The Allies dig through your bunker. They hold your teeth up to the light, like some terrible relic. Stalin keeps the mystery alive by refusing to confirm your death. Conspiracies bloom. Sightings pop up from Argentina to Antarctica. But deep down, everyone knows you're gone. Berlin is rubble. Germany is occupied. The Third Reich becomes a phrase used only in history books and courtroom indictments. And the world, it swears loudly, tearfully, and perhaps naively, that it will never let this happen again. But even in death, you cast shadows. Your name lingers like smoke in the minds of generations. You don't get statues, you don't get national holidays, but you get remembered, not as a hero, not even as a villain in the classic sense, but as a warning of what happens when rage wears a uniform. A warning that sometimes the man who promises salvation is merely the one who ensures ruin. You died with your empire in ashes, your wife beside you, your dreams undone, and yet some still whisper your name. But that can wait until you wake. The flames may have consumed your body, but your legacy smoulders on, like an acrid stain. No rain can quite wash away. Germany, now gutted, does not mourn you. It limps through the rubble, dazed and disbelieving, unsure whether it's waking from a nightmare or still sleepwalking through one. The war is over, but the reckoning is just beginning. And your name, it becomes shorthand for horror, for extremism, for what happens when charisma outpaces conscience. Nuremberg convenes, not as a theatre of vengeance, but of order, of documentation, of forced confrontation. The world brings your inner circle, what's left of it, into court. Goering, the once jovial ace, now scowls in oversized glasses behind bulletproof glass. Hess feigns amnesia. Ribbentrop stammers like a man who practiced his lines and forgot them mid-scene. The courtroom becomes a historical autopsy. The term crimes against humanity enters the global lexicon because of you. Historians still argue whether your death spared you justice or denied it, but the trials are not for you. They are for the victims, the survivors, the generations to come. Germany is carved in two, east and west. The Allies administer their slices with equal parts steel and shame. West Germany rebuilds under the watchful eye of the Americans. East Germany becomes a Soviet satellite soaked in concrete and surveillance. And in both, your memory is radioactive, not a statue to be defaced, but an absence to be tiptoed around. Schools hesitate, books censor. Children ask, why did we follow him? And parents answer with sighs and silence. But your myth doesn't die, not completely. In whispers, in margins, in certain pubs and pamphlets, it flickers. Not love for you, exactly, but the seduction of certainty, of scapegoats, of the promise that everything would be okay, if only someone else were gone. You didn't invent hatred, but you refined it. You packaged it in uniforms, in parades, in symbols, so visually compelling that people stopped asking what they meant. You gave boredom a purpose. You gave fear a name, and then you fed both until they burst. And now, long after your death, your iconography lingers. The swastika is banned, yet drawn in secret. Your speeches are dissected, not for wisdom, but for warning signs. Your image, bizarrely, becomes a meme, a punchline, a shorthand for the worst thing imaginable. It's strange how history does that, flattens monsters into symbols. You're no longer a man, you're an alarm bell. Meanwhile, the survivors live with memories that don't age. Holocaust testimonies filter into museums and documentaries, names etched into walls, piles of shoes, letters that never got mailed. You tried to erase an entire people, and instead you created an archive so vast, forgetting became impossible. And Germany, it chooses a strange path, not to deny but to remember. Memorials rise where camps once stood. The past is not buried, but catalogued, analyzed, mourned. You wanted eternal glory. Instead, you got eternal cautionary tale. But the world is fickle. The years go by. The Cold War comes and goes. Berlin reunites. Statues fall. Others rise. And slowly, softly, dangerously, your story becomes just history. A school lesson, a paragraph, a name in a crossword puzzle. Until, sometimes, someone hears your words again. Not yours exactly, but ones that rhyme. Someone promises greatness, promises walls, promises purity, and somewhere, deep in the soul of a tired nation, the same old hunger stirs. It's not your resurrection, it's something worse, your repetition. But that can wait until you wake. So there you are, dead, cremated, scattered, and yet you still manage to hold power. Not actual control, of course. That's gone with your bunker walls and brittle bones. But symbolic power. Oh, that lingers like an unpleasant perfume on history's collar. You don't just haunt Germany. You haunt the very idea of politics, of rhetoric, of how far a lie can go when whispered by someone who believes it too much. Post-war Germany tries to clean house, but it's like trying to vacuum up fog. The civil service, the judiciary, even the schools, all were entangled in your machinery. You weren't just a man, you were a system. So dismantling you means more than toppling statues. It means rethinking everything. The Allies call it denazification, which sounds like a deep cleaning, but ends up more like a light dusting. Some people are jailed, others are quietly rehired. It's awkward, really. The same bureaucrats who rubber-stamped your Reich paperwork are now issuing post-war ID cards. Democracy returns, but with the nervous energy of someone who's just escaped a cult and still flinches at the sound of boots. But hey, at least West Germany tries. East Germany, under Soviet control, decides it was never part of the problem. Nazism, they say, that was them. We are the anti-fascist Germany, which is rich, considering the Stasi soon becomes one of the most comprehensive surveillance states in human history. Different uniform, same fear. Historians still argue whether the speed of West Germany's economic miracle, thanks to the Marshall Plan, helped bury your memory, or just built a new house over your unmarked grave. By the 1950s, the autobahns are full again, the factories hum, and you become a topic people lower their voices to mention, especially in public. But silence doesn't mean healing, it just means delay. Then the trials begin, not legal ones, but generational. Children grow up and start asking their parents, "Where were you during all this?" And the answers range from shameful mutters to angry denial. "We didn't know, we were afraid. It was the times." Truth bends, memory warps. The guilt is inherited like brittle furniture, unwanted but impossible to throw out. Still in this fragile new Germany, something remarkable begins. A commitment not just to democracy, but to humility. West Germany reinvents itself with a constitution designed like a trauma response. Checks, balances, rights. A government that learns to fear itself just enough. Your dream of an eternal Reich reduced to a democracy with training wheels. And yet, there are cracks. In the 1960s, a wave of young people demand answers. The student protests don't just oppose war or capitalism, they challenge the unspoken pact of forgetting. They bring your crimes into daylight, photos, testimonies, footage of the camps. It's no longer abstract, it's grotesquely real. You're dragged out of the shadows, and this time no one cheers. Germany starts to teach your story, not as triumph, but as a how not to manual. School children visit Dachau. Textbooks pull no punches. And still, it's not enough, because evil never dies. It just gets better at marketing. And so, your myth doesn't vanish, it mutates. Extremists rebrand you. Some deny the Holocaust outright. Others admire your leadership as if genocide were just a footnote. Skinheads shave their heads, tattoo your symbols, and march with the kind of conviction only the deeply ignorant can sustain. You become the Voldemort of 20th century history, dreaded, dangerous, occasionally memed. And the rest of the world, it learns, slowly, with varying degrees of grace. Democracies build resilience, not just in laws, but in stories. Your rise becomes a blueprint of what not to allow, the stoking of fear, the erosion of truth, the worship of certainty. You are the end of something, but also a warning, a red line drawn in blood across the 20th century. And even now, long after your Reich has crumbled into dust and museum exhibits, even after the echoes of your voice have grown faint and pathetic, your shadow still flickers on the wall whenever power is left unchecked. But that can wait until you wake. If history had a pause button, Germany pressed it in 1945, and only now, a decade later, it's starting to breathe again. Slowly, cautiously, the country begins to reconstruct not just buildings, but a national identity. And you are what they're building away from. Every brick laid in post-war West Germany is a rebuttal to your legacy. Every city rebuilt is a whispered apology to the past. But apologies are complicated, because while many Germans want to move forward, not all agree on how or whether they should feel guilt. Some say we were victims too, others say we had no choice. But a brave few, say the unspeakable. We let it happen. Meanwhile, across the Iron Curtain, East Germany pretends you never existed. In their official version of history, they were the first anti-fascists, a nation of resistors. Convenient, isn't it? Never mind that many former Nazis simply traded swastikas for hammer and sickle pins. As long as they served the new regime, no one asked too many questions. And while your memory curdles in politics, it flourishes in film. The 1950s and 60s become a cinematic exorcism. black and white reels showing goose-stepping parades, bombed cities, haunted eyes. Your moustache becomes shorthand for evil. The world learns your image, your voice, your downfall, not through textbooks, but through celluloid and screenplays. Historians still argue whether this media obsession helped educate or simply desensitized. You became an icon, not of admiration, but of fear, absurdity, and caricature. Charlie Chaplin mocks you. Later, the producers will turn you into a punchline. The world laughs, not because it's funny, but because it's trying to process something too big to swallow whole. But you didn't just leave behind ruins and nightmares. You left behind institutions, terrifyingly effective ones. Your surveillance state inspired East Germany's Stasi. Your propaganda machine became a blueprint for future autocrats. Even your uniforms, those crisp black lines, those cold aesthetics, are studied by fashion theorists who whisper, "Why does evil have to look so sharp?" And the most chilling legacy, you proved that ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, doctors, could become instruments of horror under the right pressure. The banality of evil, as one philosopher later calls it. You didn't just build a regime, you unlocked something terrible in the human psyche, obedience without conscience. So what do, the world, I mean, in your absence? They legislate, ban symbols, outlaw speech that echoes your slogans. Germany makes Holocaust denial a crime, other countries follow suit. And yet censorship is a delicate weapon. It cuts both ways. Some whisper that banning your ideas only makes them more alluring to the fringe, more forbidden. And then comes Israel, a nation born from the ashes of your plan. Survivors build it not just as refuge, but as defiance. Every city, every school, every child born there is a rebuke to your final solution. It thrives, and it never forgets. You wanted to erase a people. Instead, you gave them cause to rise again. Back in Europe, borders shift, alliances form, NATO, the EU, all underpinned by a silent promise, never again. Your war destroyed the idea of nationalism as pure virtue. Countries now look sideways before looking inward. But whispers still echo. In dark corners of politics, in angry marches, in online forums, your ghost flickers. Not you precisely, but your methods, your style, the manipulation, the appeal to lost greatness, the convenient scapegoats. And some ask, quietly, how it happened, how you convinced a nation of poets and philosophers to follow you into hell. The answer isn't simple. It never was. It's in fear, in pride, in economic ruin, in the seductive relief of blaming someone else. You didn't invent propaganda, but you made it sing. You didn't invent racism, but you weaponized it into policy. You didn't invent power, but you hollowed it out and wore it like a mask. And when that mask cracked, there was nothing behind it but a small, angry man who once wanted to paint. But that can wait until you wake. So let's take a step back, before the ashes, before the war, before the iron curtain of your downfall became a school lesson. Let's return to that moment when your voice was still new, when your rhetoric hadn't yet choked the world. The year is somewhere in the mid-1930s, and the Reich is humming like a well-oiled, deeply disturbing machine. You've already banned political opposition. The Reichstag is a rubber stamp. The press reads more like a diary of your mood swings. Germany, once loud and fractious and frustratingly democratic, is now oddly synchronized. People say Heil Hitler at the post office. Children chant party slogans between math and grammar. Even the architecture begins to scowl. And you're reveling in it. The rallies in Nuremberg are less political events and more Broadway nightmares. Lights, drums, flags rising like steel forests. Albert Speer designs the whole thing like it's for the gods, not mortals. The sheer scale of it all, it doesn't whisper power, it screams it, and the people, they scream back. But of course there's a catch. This unity, the flags, the chants, the smiling propaganda posters, only works because you've decided who belongs and who doesn't. Your regime doesn't start with mass murder. It starts with paperwork. Jewish citizens are defined, categorized, dehumanized in legalese. The Nuremberg laws strip them of citizenship, marriage rights, dignity. It's all very bureaucratic, cold, precise, no screaming, just silence and stamps. Then come the symbols, the yellow stars, the signs on benches, the subtle cruelties that bloom into something monstrous. Historians still argue whether you intended the Holocaust from the start, or whether it emerged from your system like rot from damp wood. What's certain is this: the path was paved long before the camps. It began in offices, in speeches, in silence. The kind of silence that says, well, they're not like us, are they? And yet, for all your obsession with purity, your Reich becomes strangely obsessed with spectacle. You elevate violence into performance. The burning of books is choreographed like ballet. Kristallnacht, the so-called Night of Broken Glass, isn't a riot, it's a message. Synagogues torched, Jewish businesses shattered, people beaten in their homes, and most chillingly, ordinary citizens watch it unfold, not with horror, but with a kind of numb resignation. Some even cheer. You don't need everyone to believe. Just enough. Enough to look away, enough to nod, enough to enforce the rules, stamp the papers, carry out the orders with tired indifference. And it works. For a while. Germany's economy recovers not because of your genius, but because you invest heavily in infrastructure and, let's be honest, war preparation. The autobahns get built, the factories buzz, and the people, many of them anyway, start to say, maybe he's not so bad. You give them jobs, parades, scapegoats. You give them someone to blame, the Jewish banker, the Marxist professor, the foreign press, anyone but you. And beneath it all, the SS grows, not just a police force, an ideology in boots. Himmler builds it like a religion, with rituals, ranks, oaths to you. And the camps, they start small. Protective custody you call it, but they expand quickly. Dachau, Sachsenhausen, then others, darker still. And here's the terrifying truth. People adjust. They walk past the trains. They file the reports. They complain more about rationed butter than missing neighbours. Evil, it turns out, rarely wears a mask. Most days, it just looks like a clerk doing his job. Meanwhile, you keep smiling for the cameras, touring factories, hugging children. The saviour of Germany, they call you. The man who restored pride. But pride in what, exactly? In exclusion? In silence? In fear? You didn't just change laws. You rewired moral compasses, made cruelty seem rational, necessary even. And once that switch is flipped, once empathy is labelled weakness, it becomes incredibly hard to switch it back. You weren't just building an army, you were building obedience. But that can wait until you wake. The night feels colder than usual, though it's not the weather. It's November 9th, 1938. You're watching the nation exhale years of rehearsed hatred. The glass crunches under boots like dry leaves. Storefronts shattered, synagogues aflame, 1,000 whispers of violence turned into roars. Kristallnacht, they'll call it later, the night of broken glass, poetic if utterly hollow. But for you, this is not chaos, it's choreography. You didn't light every fire, but you handed out the matches. You made it feel inevitable. That's the trick, isn't it? Not just permission, but normalization. Make hate feel like hygiene, like civic duty, like keeping the sidewalks clean. Racial hygiene, you call it, because nothing says scientific progress like burning prayer books. And the police, the fire brigades, they show up, but only to ensure flames don't leap to Aryan buildings. The rest is allowed to burn, a performance piece in authoritarian theatre. Historians still argue whether this was the moment when things became irreversible, when your plans mutated from persecution to annihilation, what's certain is that after this, there's no pretending it's just politics, no illusion of civility. You have tested the waters of public reaction and found them warm enough to boil. Thousands of Jews are arrested, not for crimes, but for existing, rounded up, beaten, thrown into camps that are no longer re-education centers, but preambles to something much darker. The world watches, vaguely horrified, then turns the page. A few diplomats protest, newspapers print editorials, but mostly they look away. And this, of course, emboldens you. It's not just Germany anymore. Your rhetoric leaks across borders, like ink in floodwater. Fascism begins to glow faintly in other countries too. Italy, already under Mussolini's spell, nods in recognition. In Spain, Franco sharpens his own knives. Even in Britain and America, there are those who whisper, maybe he has a point. Because you don't just sell hate, you sell order. And to a world still shaken from the Great Depression, order looks pretty good. Efficient trains, clean streets, national pride, all bought at the price of someone else's life. You weren't hiding any of it. That's the real horror. You wrote it down, you shouted it in stadiums, you etched it into policy, but people prefer their monsters hidden, not wrapped in bureaucracy and bathed in floodlights. And so Kristallnacht doesn't end with an apology. It ends with silence. Insurance companies debate whether Jewish shop owners are entitled to compensation. Spoiler, they aren't. Their losses become just another line item in the Reich's grand budget of destruction. Meanwhile, your propaganda machine spins it as spontaneous outrage. You claim the German people simply erupted. A lie so bold it doesn't even bother to wear a disguise. And yet it works, because people want to believe they're swept up in history, not complicit in atrocity. And the children? They're watching. They see the smashed toys behind broken windows. They hear the laughter of boys in brown shirts. They absorb the lesson not just from books, but from bricks, that cruelty is rewarded, that empathy is dangerous, that silence is survival. In a few years, those children will become soldiers, guards, administrators. They won't need orders. They'll know the drill. But you keep smiling, touring new territories, tightening your grip. You've turned hate into an economy, stripped people of their rights, their homes, their humanity, and still managed to sell it as restoration. The magician's sleight of hand, distract with patriotism, deliver oppression. And while Kristallnacht may seem like just one night, it is in truth an overture. The lights dim, the curtain rises, and the world, most of it, stays in its seats. Because if you build the right stage, people will applaud almost anything. But that can wait until you wake. You return to Austria not as a son, but as a conqueror. March 1938, and your boots press into the soil of your birthplace with the smug weight of inevitability. The Anschluss, they call it, a polite word for a forceful embrace. You don't invade. Oh no, you're invited. That's your favorite kind of power, the kind that looks consensual from a distance. The borders dissolve like sugar in tea. No shots fired, no declarations of war, just a wave of flags, a flood of swastikas, and crowds that cheer with a strange mixture of relief and rehearsal. Historians still argue whether the Austrian public welcomed you with genuine enthusiasm or fear-polished smiles, but from the balcony of the Hofburg Palace it looks like victory, the kind that makes you feel invincible. And you feel it, like a drug. The roar of the masses, the sense of destiny fulfilled. You stand there, arm raised, as if summoning an ancient empire from its slumber. But this isn't the return of the Habsburgs. It's the rise of something far more brutal, far more performative. It's not a restoration, it's an absorption. Austria ceases to exist as a nation. Its institutions, laws, language merged into the Reich, like an organ transplant. And suddenly Austrian Jews find themselves under your laws. They wake up in Vienna and go to bed in the Third Reich. The rules change overnight, and the consequences are swift. Within days, Jewish homes are looted, synagogue desecrated, professionals humiliated in the streets, civil servants vanish from their posts. The same shops that sold Mozart busts now sell Mein Kampf. Even Freud, that prophet of the unconscious, flees with his family. He signs a document for your goons, affirming he was treated with courtesy. His footnote, "I can heartily recommend the Gestapo to anyone." You take that as a compliment. Of course you do. But while Austria folds neatly into your scrapbook of conquest, other neighbours watch nervously. Czechoslovakia, for one. Its Sudetenland, a region with a large German-speaking population, becomes your next obsession. You claim it's about ethnic unity, self-determination, national pride. In truth, it's leverage, and the West, still drunk on peace treaties and wishful thinking, they give it to you. The Munich Agreement 1938, Britain and France hand you Sudetenland on a diplomatic platter. No Czech leaders present, no resistance permitted, just men in suits convincing themselves that if they feed the wolf enough steak, he'll stop circling the village. Neville Chamberlain returns to London, waving a piece of paper. "Peace for our time," he declares. A line so tragically optimistic it echoes through every future history classroom with grim irony. You watch it all unfold like a silent film, smiling just slightly, not because you tricked them, but because they wanted to be tricked. Appeasement isn't weakness, it's convenience, wrapped in politeness, disguised as diplomacy. And once Sudetenland is yours, the rest of Czechoslovakia is just a matter of time. Within months your troops march into Prague. No German population to rescue this time, no plausible pretext, just raw power. The world gasps, and then shrugs, because what's one more line on a map? You've made conquest look easy. No bombs, no battles, just paperwork and pageantry. And for the average German, this is thrilling. Your approval ratings soar. You've restored the empire without war, without cost. You're the magician who pulls land from a hat. But inside the regime, things churn. The SS grows bolder, the Gestapo more paranoid. Lists are drawn, files grow thicker, and the camps, once experimental, now begin to expand with chilling efficiency. You may not be gassing people yet, but the infrastructure is rising like scaffolding around a nightmare. And still, no one stops you. Austria cheers, Czechoslovakia crumbles, and Britain, it practices speeches. You, meanwhile, scan the horizon for Poland, but that can wait until you wake. It's late summer 1939. Your gaze fixes eastward. Poland, flat, vulnerable, inconveniently independent. You've already digested Austria and chewed through Czechoslovakia like they were nothing more than appetizers. Now you're eyeing the main course. But you know this time it won't go down so easily. Britain and France have finally stopped clapping from the audience. They've promised Poland protection, which is cute. So what do? You make a deal with the devil, or rather with Stalin. Yes, the same Soviet Union you've railed against in every speech. Bolsheviks, parasites, ideological cockroaches. You've called them everything short of a sneeze. And now, in the most awkward handshake in 20th century history, you sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty with your ideological nemesis, complete with a secret clause, "Let's split Poland like a cake. You take the West, I take the East." Historians still argue whether Stalin truly believed you'd honor the pact. Spoiler, you won't. But for now, both of you smile, toast, and begin sharpening your knives. September 1st, 1930. Your tanks roll into Poland under a grey sky. Blitzkrieg, you call it. Lightning war. Fast, brutal, relentless. Dive bombers screech overhead, railroads are torn apart, cities crumble like sand castles under artillery. Polish cavalry charges your mechanized divisions. Bravery meets futility. Warsaw holds out for weeks, but eventually it too falls. And the West? They keep their word, kind of. Britain and France declare war on Germany, but action minimal. They wait fortified behind the Maginot Line, a concrete belt of confidence that proves about as useful as a wet napkin. The phony war, they call it. You've invaded a sovereign nation, and the defenders choose paperwork over bullets. Meanwhile, the Soviets enter Poland from the east, as agreed, and suddenly the country ceases to exist. Again, the borders collapse. The Polish government flees. Refugees flood roads that no longer lead to nations. Poland becomes a cautionary tale and a graveyard at once. Back home, your people cheer. You've delivered another swift victory. The economy surges, at least on the surface. The army swells. Your portrait is hung in more homes than crucifixes. You are not just a leader now. You are history in motion, a myth made flesh. And yet, even as you bathe in applause, something darker begins to stir behind your lines. The SS, now seasoned and self-assured, begins executing what they call cleansing operations. Intellectuals, priests, resistance leaders, anyone who might organize dissent. Mass graves appear in Polish forests. Names vanish into ledgers. You call it security. Others will call it the beginning of genocide. And the Jews? Their world narrows. Ghettos rise. Barbed wire pens for entire communities. Starvation is policy. Disease a strategy. You don't need gas chambers yet. Bureaucracy and neglect do the job just fine. You test the boundaries of horror. No one stops you. But Poland is not the end. It's the start. You look westward now with the smug confidence of someone who just got away with murder in daylight. France, you say, will fall. Britain, a paper lion. And in fairness, you're not entirely wrong. In the spring of 1940, your forces sweep through Denmark and Norway like wind through paper, then Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally the unthinkable. France collapses in 6 weeks. Paris elegant, tragic, occupied. Your boots echo through its boulevards. You stand at the Eiffel Tower, grinning like a schoolboy. You've done what the Kaiser couldn't. You've broken the spine of Western Europe. But still, Britain resists. And that irritates you. You expected them to fold, to negotiate, to plead. Instead, they dig in. Churchill growls on the radio. The RAF snarls over London. You unleash the Luftwaffe. Cities burn. Children sleep in subway tunnels. But the island holds. You can't quite crush it. Not yet. And so you begin to look south, to Africa, to the Balkans, to Russia. Oh, Russia. But that can wait until you wake. France has fallen, folded like poorly shuffled cards. June 1940, and you're walking through Paris, as if it's a museum you've always secretly owned. The swastika flaps over the Eiffel Tower, like it belongs there, as though centuries of French culture were just rehearsals for your arrival. Your troops parade down the Champs-Élysées, and you sit smug in your Berlin office, likely wondering why Napoleon made it all look so hard. But there's still that island, Britain. Stubborn, inconvenient, Churchill-centered Britain. You thought they'd negotiate. After all, you offered peace. Not real peace, of course. Your version, keep what I've stolen, and maybe I'll stop stealing. But Churchill refuses. He snarls into microphones. He calls you names. And worst of all, his people listen. So you shift tactics. You launch Operation Sea Lion, your plan to invade. But first, control the skies. The Battle of Britain begins. Your Luftwaffe against their Royal Air Force. You bomb airfields, radar stations, supply lines. Then you get impatient and start bombing cities. London burns, but refuses to break. Historians still debate whether this was your first major strategic mistake. By targeting civilians instead of military infrastructure, you gave the RAF time to recover, regroup, retaliate. British resolve hardens. Morale doesn't collapse, it ignites. They start painting silhouettes of Spitfires in school books. Children collect scrap metal for planes. Even pigeons join the war effort. delivering messages more reliably than some of your generals. Meanwhile, back home, you're polishing your myth. You pose for portraits. Speeches swell with destiny, but your enemies, they're multiplying. Resistance movements in France, Yugoslavia, Norway, silent fighters with forged papers and homemade radios. You build walls, they slip through cracks. And then you take your megalomania for a spin and look east. Russia, your secret obsession. Lebensraum, living space, you call it, as if millions of lives were just clutter you could clear for breathing room. You hate communism, yes, but you want land more. Despite your pact with Stalin, you prepare, slowly, carefully, but not quietly. And here's where your confidence shifts from chilling to ridiculous. You think you can defeat the Soviet Union in weeks. Napoleon, for all his ego, at least packed a coat. You begin moving troops, over 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, trucks, horses, guns, all poised at the border. And on June 26, 1941, you give the order. Operation Barbarossa begins. It's stunning at first. The Soviet lines collapse. You capture hundreds of thousands. The Red Army reels. Stalin retreats into silence. His moustache suddenly useless. Cities like Minsk and Smolensk fall within days. Your troops believe the war is won, so do you. But Russia isn't France. It isn't Poland. It's a different kind of beast, sprawling, stubborn, unpredictable. The roads are mud, the maps are useless, and the distances make your supply lines stretch like overcooked spaghetti. Moscow is still hundreds of miles away, and winter is coming, not metaphorically, actually. And it turns out, Russian winters are not shy. Your soldiers freeze in uniforms designed for September. Fuel lines crack, engines die, fingers turn black, rifles jam. The enemy doesn't always need bullets. Sometimes they just need time. Yet you refuse to retreat. That's not your style. You dig in. You demand loyalty. You call freezing soldiers cowards if they shiver too loudly. And while the Wehrmacht is stuck in the snow, the Red Army regroups, resupplies, returns with vengeance. But this eastward fantasy of yours was never just about war. It's about ideology, about annihilation. You didn't come to occupy Russia. You came to erase it. Villages are razed, civilians executed. Entire Jewish populations rounded up and gunned down into pits. Not as a sideshow, but as policy. The Holocaust, once bureaucratic and quiet, now grows into its full monstrous form. Einsatzgruppen trail your army. Like shadows made of blood, they kill methodically, deliberately. Not with rage, but with reports. You don't need gas chambers yet. Mass shootings suffice. And still, Moscow stands. You've awoken a giant, and worse, you've given it purpose. But that can wait until you wake. The cold settles in like a curse. Your dreams of blitzkrieg brilliance have frozen somewhere between Smolensk and Moscow, buried under 1,000 kilometers of snow. The mighty Wehrmacht, your steel fist, is now an icicle cracking at the edges. Russian winter doesn't care about your speeches. Frostbite doesn't negotiate with ideology. And Moscow does not fall. Instead, it bites back. December 1941, and the Red Army launches a counter-offensive. Fresh Siberian divisions, warm in their padded uniforms, push your frost-bitten troops backward. Horses collapse in snowdrifts. Tanks grind to a halt. Supply lines snap like brittle twigs. And you, back in your warm headquarters, refuse to acknowledge the unraveling. You command them to hold ground, to not retreat. You think this is willpower. Your generals think it's lunacy. Some of them start writing memoirs in their heads. And then, almost poetically, comes your second catastrophe, Pearl Harbor. No, you didn't attack it. Japan did, December 7th, 1941. But in your infinite brilliance, You decide to declare war on the United States anyway. Historians still argue why. Was it loyalty to your Axis allies? A strategic miscalculation? Ego? Probably all three, stirred in a teacup of delusion. Now, the United States joins the Allies, the country with the world's largest industrial capacity, oceans away but fully awake and angry, very angry. So to recap, you're stuck in a war you can't win in the East, and now you've invited the sleeping giant from the West, all this while Britain, still battered but breathing, bombs your cities nightly. Meanwhile, inside your empire, the final gears of extermination begin to grind. The ghettos are no longer enough. You want a solution, a final one. January 1942, a villa in Wannsee, a meeting of minds, bureaucrats, officers, legal scholars. No black hoods, no dramatic oaths, just polite discussion of logistics, of murder, trains, quotas, gas, how to remove 11 million people like a pest control problem. It is genocide wrapped in clipboards. This is where industrial killing becomes standard policy. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, names that should never have been spoken. Now they echo in your infrastructure. You do not just destroy people, you erase them. Names, languages, lullabies, recipes, whole family trees incinerated. And still, you call it order. The German people don't all cheer anymore. Some look away, some pretend not to hear, but your propaganda still works enough to keep the machine running, enough to keep trains moving on time to places no one returns from. Yet cracks appear. Your Africa Corps falters in the desert. Rommel, the desert fox, is brilliant, but even he can't outmaneuver dwindling fuel and Allied reinforcements. By late 1942, the British pushback at El Alamein, North Africa, begins to slip from your grasp. And then Stalingrad. The name alone sounds like a death knell. August 1942. A city you didn't need to take but had to. Out of pride, you bombard it into rubble, then try to occupy the rubble. Street by street, floor by floor, your soldiers bleed for every meter. And the Soviets? They refuse to surrender. It becomes a siege, then a trap. Winter comes again. Your Sixth Army is surrounded. Supply drops fail. Ammunition runs low. Soldiers eat rats. Some eat each other. You forbid surrender. You demand victory or death, as if they're synonyms. They choose the second. By February 1943, the Sixth Army is gone. Over 90,000 soldiers march into captivity. A fraction ever returns. This is the turning point. The myth of your invincibility crumbles like ice underfoot. You blame your generals. You scream at maps. But the tides have turned, and they do not turn back. Your enemies grow stronger. Their factories hum with purpose. Their citizens plant victory gardens and learn your name like a curse. And you double down. But that can wait until you wake. The world closes in like a tightening vice. It's no longer a question of whether you'll lose, but how violently it will happen. And still you act as if destiny owes you something, as if one more speech, one more purge, one more desperate offensive might turn the tide. You're running out of time, but that doesn't stop you from squandering what's left. 1943 brings more than defeat, it brings humiliation. After Stalingrad, your generals speak in hushed tones. Their once firm salutes begin to waver. The Luftwaffe, once the pride of your war machine, is a ghost of its former self. Fuel shortages ground your planes. Allied bombers crisscross the sky like angry gods, reducing your cities to flaming rubble by night. And the German people? They're not so easily dazzled anymore. Ration lines stretch longer than your promises. Homes collapse. Families vanish in air raids. The myth cracks. The Führer isn't magic. He's just a man with too many maps and not enough answers. But you're not done trying. July 1943, Kursk. Another gamble. You launch Operation Citadel, a massive tank assault aimed at reclaiming initiative on the Eastern Front. It becomes the largest tank battle in history, and your last offensive in the East. The Red Army, now swollen with manpower and industry, not only withstands the blow, they break you. And they don't stop. By winter, they're pushing west, village by village. Your army retreats through scorched fields and smoking forests, dragging wounded pride behind them. You call it tactical repositioning. They call it survival. Meanwhile, in Italy, another humiliation. Mussolini falls. Your old fascist buddy is ousted, imprisoned, and replaced by a government that immediately surrenders to the Allies. Italy flips sides like a card table. You send commandos to rescue him, because of course you do, and they succeed. He flees north and sets up a puppet state, a grotesque parody of fascist glory. But Italy, once your loyal ally, is now a battlefield. American and British troops storm its beaches. Naples, Salerno, Anzio, the soft underbelly of Europe, turns out to be armoured after all. Every inch is soaked in blood. Back in Germany, the cracks widen. July 20, 1944. A briefcase, a bomb, and a prayer. Klaus von Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators try to kill you in your Wolf's Lair headquarters. The bomb explodes, but you survive. Barely, shaken, bruised, half-deafened, but alive. And now, paranoid. You respond with fury. Thousands arrested, hundreds executed. The Wehrmacht is purged. Officers hang from piano wire in Berlin's Plötzensee prison, their deaths filmed as warnings. You don't just kill the conspirators, you erase their names, their families, their legacy. The message is clear. Treason will not be tolerated, not even failure. But fear can only hold the dam so long. By late 1944, the Red Army crosses into Poland. The Western Allies, Americans, Brits, Canadians, push through France. Normandy's no longer just a code name, it's a monument of bravery and blood. D-Day, June 6, a storm of steel and sand. Your Atlantic Wall proves about as useful as a sandcastle at high tide. Paris is liberated in August. Brussels follows. Even as you push the desperate Battle of the Bulge in December, trying to split the Allied lines in Belgium, the momentum is gone. Your troops run on frost and fantasy. They're outgunned, outnumbered, and increasingly out of faith. Berlin, once the heart of your empire, begins to hear the thunder of distant guns. And you retreat, not from power, but from reality. You move deeper into your bunker. You stop visiting the front. You trust no one. The charisma that once lit stadiums now flickers like a dying bulb. Your speeches shrink in both size and conviction. The world no longer listens. It prepares. And yet you pretend. You draw lines on maps. You shuffle divisions that no longer exist. You send orders to commanders already captured. You speak of miracle weapons and last stands. But there are no miracles left, just ruins. But that can wait until you wake. By 1945, your empire is a shell, a haunted house propped up by fear and illusion. The borders you once bragged about, measured not in miles but in conquests, are collapsing like old scaffolding. Allies press from the west, Soviets from the east. You, once master of momentum, now shuffle in the shadows, muttering about loyalty, betrayal, and maps that lie. Berlin prepares for its final act. The city, once manicured and proud, is now a battlefield in slow motion. Rubble replaces neighborhoods. The air smells of dust, smoke, and something worse, hopelessness. Families descend into basements, holding their children as if body heat can ward off artillery shells. The Soviets are closing in, and everyone knows what that means. You seal yourself in the Führer bunker like a pharaoh sealing his tomb, but without the dignity of gold or worship. Just concrete, cold walls and the echo of your own voice. You hold meetings, grim recitations of fantasy orders, to divisions that exist only on paper. Generals nod, knowing the truth, but too afraid to speak it. And then, the final insult, your birthday. April 20, 1945. You turn 56. Not exactly a milestone worth celebrating under these circumstances. Berlin is under siege. Your guests arrive with hollow eyes and rehearsed smiles. They salute, drink bad champagne, and pretend the city isn't crumbling above them. It's less of a birthday and more of a last rite. The next day the Soviets begin their final assault. Berlin becomes a blender. Soviet artillery flattens entire districts. Tanks grind over boulevards where parades once marched. Street by street, building by building, the Red Army advances. German soldiers fight like cornered animals, because that's what they are now. Some resist, others surrender, others desert and vanish into the chaos. And amidst it all, you retreat further inward. You shuffle maps, stare at imaginary reinforcements. You fantasize about Steiner's counterattack, even as those around you glance nervously at each other. Steiner has no divisions, no men, no fuel, but you keep waiting. Historians still debate whether this denial was madness, arrogance, or fear. Most agree, probably all three. Your closest aides are still by your side, but their faces are changing. The worship in their eyes is gone. Eva Braun, your long-time companion, stays, not because she believes in you, but because she's chosen to die with you. Romance in ruins. April 28. You learn that Mussolini has been captured and executed, hung upside down, his corpse desecrated by the very people who once cheered for him. You pretend not to care, but your fingers tremble when you light a cigarette. You dictate your will. It's part manifesto, part tantrum. You blame everyone, generals, traitors, Jews, communists. Never yourself, never the man who started the fire. And then one final act of control. April 29. You marry Eva in the bunker. A quiet, surreal ceremony. Champagne is poured. The witnesses sign the papers. For one absurd moment, it feels like a wedding, and then it doesn't. The next day, you test the cyanide capsule on your dog. It works. You hand another to Eva. She takes it without hesitation. Then, in a moment rehearsed 1,000 times in your fevered mind, you shoot yourself, not on the battlefield, not in defiance, but in a dark room beneath the earth, surrounded by ashes and silence. Your aides follow instructions. Your bodies are burned with gasoline in the garden above. What's left is ashes, scattered, buried, forgotten, found again, buried again. You vanish into myth, into nightmares, into footnotes, but you do not vanish cleanly. Outside, Berlin is still falling, and the world, for the first time in years, exhales. But that can wait until you wake. So you're gone. A pistol's crack in a bunker sealed your chapter, but not your shadow. The flames that licked your corpse didn't purify, only cauterized. And above your smouldering grave, Berlin weeps through bloodied concrete and mangled trees. The Soviets raise their flag over the Reichstag, not for strategy, but for symbolism. The beast is dead, they seem to say. But the wounds, they are just beginning to scar. Outside your bunker, your empire falls like dominoes drenched in gasoline. Germany surrenders unconditionally on May 7th, 1945. There's no negotiation, no poetic last stand, just signatures, silence, and an eerie kind of relief. Your carefully constructed mythology collapses like the bunkers under Berlin, dust to dust, lie to lie. But don't get too cozy in your grave, because what follows isn't peace, it's reckoning. The Allies uncover your secrets, the death camps, the gas chambers, the warehouses of human hair. They find names scrawled into walls by fingernails. They find bones in forests. They find what you thought could be erased. and the world learns a new vocabulary. Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, words that now mean horror, mechanized, and signed off in triplicate. The scale becomes incomprehensible. 6 million Jews, millions more, Roma, disabled, political dissidents, queer people, prisoners of war, vanish into your final solution. You didn't just start a war, you industrialized hatred. The Nuremberg trials begin in November. The men who once saluted you now sit in defendant boxes. Some sneer, some cry, some, like Goering, try to rewrite their roles into noble necessity. Justice arrives, haltingly, imperfectly, but undeniably. 12 are sentenced to hang. Others serve long sentences. Some escape entirely, slipping through cracks in South America, protected by silence and shadows. Historians still argue whether the trials were justice or theatre, whether guilt was collective or personal, whether some monsters simply wore better suits. Germany, shattered and ashamed, begins a long, painful rebuild. Children grow up playing in ruins. Whole cities are mosaics of bombed-out facades and hurried reconstruction. The country is split in two, East and West, Soviet and Allied, ideology carved into geography. The Cold War begins not with fanfare, but with fatigue. And your memory? Ah, that's where things get strange. Some try to erase you, scrub your name from textbooks, outlaw the salute, ban Mein Kampf. Others, terrifyingly, try to resurrect you in whispers and symbols. Tiny groups, always lurking, always dangerous, always wrong. But your myth mutates. You become a symbol of evil itself, the shorthand for everything that should never be repeated, not just a dictator, a cautionary tale. Artists paint you as a demon, comedians mock your mustache, teachers dissect your speeches with scalpel precision, psychologists label you. Was it trauma, narcissism, megalomania, a mix brewed in Vienna cafes and trenches in Flanders? And still the question lingers, how did you convince millions? How did an unremarkable painter with failed dreams become the most destructive figure of the 20th century? There's no single answer. Charisma, timing, chaos, and a nation desperate for something, anything to believe in. You offered certainty in uncertain times, a monster in a messiah's coat. But in the end, even your certainty died screaming. Because tyranny always ends the same way. Bunkers, betrayal, and ash. And yet, echoes remain. Swastikas carved on bathroom stalls. Conspiracy theorists in dark forums. Political speeches that feel a little too familiar. Your ghost lingers, not as presence, but as a warning. You wanted to be remembered as a god. History remembers you as a grave mistake. But that can wait until you wake. The war is over, but the silence it leaves behind is not peace, it's confusion, rubble and reckoning. The guns fall silent in May 1945, but your echoes still scream from scorched earth and shattered minds. Germany is not a country anymore. It's a wound, a smouldering heap of questions no one wants to answer. Your death should have closed the chapter. It doesn't. Instead, it opens a new genre, denial. Some refuse to believe you're even dead. He escaped, they whisper, to Argentina, to a secret Antarctic base. Some even say to the moon, because when truth is too unbearable, fantasy rushes in to soften the blow. Conspiracy becomes comfort. Historians still debate the psychology behind this. Why do so many cling to the idea that evil must live on? Maybe because it's easier than facing the scale of what was done by someone so ordinary. A mediocre student, a failed artist, a man with no great education, no military genius, just rage, timing, and the terrifying ability to speak into people's fears. As the years tick by, Germany splits into two mirror images, each trying to bury your ghost in different ways. The West democratizes under US mentorship. Capitalism, jazz, and Coca-Cola seep into the cracks. The East hardens under Soviet command. Parades, statues, and watchtowers keep history in line. But neither side forgets you. They can't. Your crimes are too large, your image too burned into the world's collective retina. The Holocaust becomes the defining atrocity of the 20th century. Survivors speak, films are made, documents uncovered. There is no denying the magnitude, yet many still try. Neo-Nazis crawl from basements, grasping at fragments of your ideology, like it's a relic from some lost golden age. But it was never golden, only blood red and ash grey. Memorials rise where camps once stood. Museums dedicate themselves not to glory, but to grief. Never again, they say. Though sometimes the world feels like it forgets too quickly. Genocides still happen, tyrants still rise. But now your name hovers over them like a shadowy watermark, proof that humanity has danced too close to the abyss before. And it might again. By the 1960s, German children begin asking questions their parents won't answer. What did you do in the war, Papa? Becomes the question that rattles family dinners. Silence becomes its own kind of confession. By the 1980s, Germany tries to own the shame. Apologies, reparations, education programs. They're imperfect, but they're something. Because guilt cannot be erased, only carried carefully for the sake of those who didn't survive. Your name becomes shorthand for evil, and strangely, for comedy too. Satire uses you as punchline, because sometimes laughing at a monster is the only way to defang it. Films like The Great Dictator and Jojo Rabbit hold up your image like a cracked mirror. It's not just mockery, it's catharsis. But you never go away. Not really. Because what you unleashed, hatred dressed as hope, remains a temptation in hard times, and the only true defense against you is remembering every name, every number, every scar. That's why we still tell your story, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. But now, dear listener, you've walked the full arc, from a lonely boy in Braunau to a bunker under Berlin, from dreams of art to nightmares of genocide. And now only the embers remain. So let's slow down, because the monsters of memory are fading, and your eyes are heavy. Let's drift into what's left. Morning returns to Germany, but it doesn't feel like sunrise. It feels like waking up after a long, poisonous fever. The curtains are gone, the windows are shattered, the house is barely standing, and the neighbours, they're watching closely, too closely. You're no longer here, of course, but your country, your stage, your audience, your ruined obsession now stumbles through the debris of your performance. The war is over, but the rebuilding has only just begun. And it's not just bricks and bridges that need reconstructing. It's memory, morality, meaning. Berlin is a skeleton. Entire neighborhoods reduced to gravel and memories. Cities like Dresden, Cologne, Hamburg, once cultural hubs, are now nothing but echoes and scorched earth. Food is scarce. Families huddle in half-rooms, heating water over camp stoves and wondering what happened to the century they were promised. And what of the people? Some deny, some confess, most just survive. Mothers barter wedding rings for bread. Children grow up fast, too fast. Old men sweep rubble in quiet resignation. A generation raised on slogans now lives in silence. They saw themselves as the chosen, now they are simply broken. In the West, the Allies roll in. The Marshall Plan promises aid, but only if Germany changes. Nazism is outlawed. Education is restructured. Streets are renamed. Propaganda is purged like poison from a wound. But some stains don't scrub off so easily. In the East, the Soviets don't bother with scrubbing. They replace your dictatorship with one of their own. No swastikas, just red stars. But fear remains, just wearing a different hat. Stasi files, informants, ration cards. It's another kind of oppression, colder, quieter, but no less sharp. Germany is now two stories in parallel. One wrapped in denim and democracy, the other in concrete and command. but both carry you, whether they admit it or not. Your presence is a bruise that no one can stop touching. Meanwhile, the rest of the world tries to learn something from your disaster. The United Nations is born, built on hope and hindsight. Israel is founded, in part because of what you destroyed. War crimes become a concept, human rights a doctrine. Your cruelty becomes the metric by which evil is measured. Never again, they say. And yet, Rwanda, Bosnia, Darfur, Myanmar, your lesson, it seems, needs constant reteaching. Back in Germany, generations turn. By the time the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, the country is no longer yours in any recognizable way. Teenagers in ripped jeans listen to rock music and roll their eyes at history, but they still learn it. In school, in memorials, in quiet walks through old train stations with brass plaques marking the names of those who never returned. Some try to revive your memory, not out of reverence, but rebellion. Skinheads, internet trolls, pseudo-intellectuals writing manifestos in forums no one should read. But for every swastika sprayed on a wall, there's someone there to scrub it off. Not always, not fast enough, but they're there. And this is what remains of your Reich. Not 1,000 years, not glory, just ghosts. Germany moves on. It has to. But it doesn't forget. It can't. Because forgetting you means inviting you back. And now, dear listener, the echoes are fading, the fire's dimmed, the rubble's cold. It's nearly time to sleep. But first, one more step through the haze. You were supposed to vanish. That was the plan. Burn the body, close the book, let the ashes scatter, and let time do the rest. But memory, real memory, doesn't work like that. It doesn't politely disappear. It mutates. It lingers. It waits behind headlines, crawls into textbooks, whispers through documentaries. And in that murky afterlife, your myth takes on a life of its own. Not a glorious life, not even a respected one, but an infamy that clings like soot. Your image becomes an icon, not of admiration, but of warning. Your moustache is shorthand for tyranny. Your name a forbidden word in polite company. But somehow, impossibly, you remain culturally unavoidable. You're in films, memes, think pieces, in every what-if scenario and dystopian cautionary tale. Historians still debate how to handle you, study you too closely, and you risk obsession, treat you too lightly, and you invite ignorance. There's no perfect way to examine evil, only necessary ones. Germany, your homeland, your Frankenstein's lab, has become a case study in remorse. It doesn't pretend it never happened. It builds museums out of horror. It turns camps into classrooms. It forces students to walk the paths of the condemned, not because they like the story, but because they need to remember the ending. But elsewhere, the lines blur more easily. Populists mimic your cadence. Conspiracy theorists adopt your tone. The internet becomes a breeding ground for shallow comparisons and tasteless jokes. Some wear your face like it's a mask of rebellion. They forget, or never knew, the fire behind it. And then there's the strange comfort people find in labeling modern problems as just like Hitler, as if doing so gives them power over chaos, as if naming the worst makes today seem manageable by contrast. But the truth is scarier. You weren't a glitch in the system. You were the system, taken to its logical, horrifying extreme. A little nationalism, a little scapegoating, add fear, stir with propaganda, bake under crisis, and suddenly the absurd becomes policy, the unthinkable becomes Tuesday. That's the myth now, that your story is distant, that it happened in black and white, that the world is too modern, too smart, too connected for anything like you to rise again. But you weren't supernatural. You were painfully human. And that, perhaps, is the scariest part of all. Still, there's hope in the telling. Because every time someone teaches your story honestly, thoroughly, without flinching, your myth weakens. Every time someone stands up against hate, your echo dulls. Every time a survivor speaks, your script is rewritten. You wanted eternity. You got a warning label. And so now, here we are, at the quiet end. The theatre is empty. The lights are off. The audience has gone home, shaken but awake. And you're a whisper, fading into the distance, which is exactly where you belong. And now, dear listener, the fire is out. The walls have crumbled. The echoes are still. You've walked through a storm of smoke and history, seen the rise, the ruin, and the residue of one man's nightmare. But that's behind you now. You are not in the bunker. You are not in the crowd. You are here, in the present, in the safety of your quiet room. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles soften. The story is done. The world, for all its noise and chaos, also remembers. It builds stones in silence. It teaches children carefully. It speaks names aloud that were once silenced. There is pain, yes, but there is also healing. There is vigilance. There is light. And in that light, the shadows grow thinner. Whatever history may hold, tonight you hold stillness. You hold quiet. You hold peace. So drift now. The world you just explored will be there in the morning, inside books, behind museum glass, on the tongues of those who refuse to forget. But for now, let it rest. There are no speeches left to shout, no maps to redraw, no boots to march. Just the steady, comforting hush of sleep, and the gentle assurance that while darkness once ruled, it does not define us. Not tonight. Not you. Let that truth carry you softly into rest. Let your body sink. Let your thoughts dissolve like mist. The story is over. You are safe. And tomorrow the world begins again.